Egyptian Heaven and Hell by E. Wallis Budge. Volume 3 is called the Contents of the Books of the Otherworld Described and Compared. This is originally 1905. Chapter 1 is the Origin of the Illustrated Guides to the Otherworld. So, let's go here. From the considerations set forth above, it is quite clear that practices of illustrating certain sections of the Book of the Dead existed under the 11th dynasty, and there is no good reason for doubting that it continued to be observed during the prosperous rule of the kings of the 12th dynasty. Under the 4th, 5th, and 6th dynasties, the selection of the extracts from the Books of the Dead, which were intended to benefit royal souls in the underworld, were cut upon the walls of the chambers and corridors of their pyramids, and in the case of private individual texts intended to produce the same effect, usually cut into the walls of the chambers wherein the stone sarcophagi were placed. The pyramids of the kings of the 11th and 12th dynasties, whether in the north or south of Egypt, are not, so far as the information at present available goes, characterized by lengthy extracts from Books of the Dead, and officials and men of rank in general were content to dispense with the cutting of religious inscriptions into the sides of stone sarcophagi, and into the walls, the passages and chambers of their tombs in the mountains, and to transfer them to the sides of their brightly painted rectangular wooden coffins. The practical advantages of this change are obvious. Wooden coffins were easier to obtain and cheaper than stone sarcophagi. Longer and fuller selections from religious texts could be easily and quickly traced upon them in the hieratic character, which an expert scribe could, no doubt, write at a rapid rate. The expense of adding colored drawings was small, and above all, the deceased would have close to his mummy the sacred writings on which he so greatly relied for assistance in the otherworld. Well, small compared to having the people experts carved out, but grinding stones to get the colors, the ochre and the charcoal, yeah, that's okay, but and above all, the deceased would have close to his mummy the sacred writings on which he so greatly relied for assistance in the other world. The coffin was so fully inscribed that he could easily be made to hold copies of all the texts deemed to be of vital importance to the dead. And such a coffin, when, as frequently the case, it was placed in a massive outer wooden coffin, served the purpose of the larger rolls of papyri inscribed with religious and funeral texts, and illustrated with elaborately painted vignettes, which were buried with the dead from the 18th to the 26th dynasty. After the death of Yemen-Mahat III, who was perhaps the greatest king of the 12th dynasty, the whole country fell into a state of confusion, and the kings of Thebes ceased to be masters of all Egypt. The kings of the 13th dynasty were Theban and reigned at Thebes, and prepared to have maintained their hold to a considerable degree upon Upper Egypt. But the kings of the 14th dynasty reigned at Khois in the Delta, and many of them were contemporaries of the kings in Upper Egypt. The kings of the 15th and 16th dynasties were Hyksos, or shepherd kings, and their rule was overthrown by Sukhanen-Ra III, a king of the 17th dynasty, and a Theban, probably about BCE 1800. In the interval between the 12th and the 18th dynasties, the ceremonies connected with the worship of the entities in their temple and the funerals of kings and officials lost the magnificence which had characterized them under the 12th dynasty, and the building of the pyramids and the making of rock-hewn tombs ceased for a period of some hundreds of years. With the rise to power of the Theban kings, which formed the 18th dynasty, a marvelous development of temple and funeral ceremonies took place, and thanks chiefly to a vast quantity of spoil which were poured into Thebes by the victorious armies of Egypt on their return from Western Asia, the cult of the entities and of the dead assumed portions which have never reached before in Egypt. The chief deity of the Thebes was Yemen, the hidden, or perhaps the unknown entity, in whose honor a shrine was built to the north of the city in a place called Apt by the Egyptians, and Karnak by the modern inhabitants of Luxor. It is impossible to say that at present exactly when the first sanctuary of this entity was built at Thebes, but the discovery of the large collection of 457 votive statues of kings and officials and other objects made by M. L. Begrain in 1901-1902 indicates that the foundation of the sanctuary of Yemen dates from this very earlier period of dynastic history. Be this as it may, the entity Yemen seems to have enjoyed no special importance or popularity in Egypt until the 12th dynasty, when his sanctuary appears to have been rebuilt and enlarged, but so long as his priests were dependent on for the maintenance upon the revenues of Upper Egypt alone, neither they nor this entity can have enjoyed any very great wealth. But when Ra III defeated the Hyksos and made himself master of all Egypt, when Yahmes I, Amasis, drove the Hyksos out from their stronghold Avaris in the delta, thus completing the work of the deliverance of the country from a foreign yoke which Ra III had begun. They attributed their success, the success of their arms, to their entity Yemen, who was from this time forward regarded not only as the principal entity of the Egyptians, but as the king of the gods. Soon after Yemen Hatep I, the successor of Yahmes I, came to the throne. He made war against the Nubians and became master of the gold-producing districts of the eastern Sudan. Remember, ancient Egyptian culture came from the southwest. His care was to rebuild, or perhaps to repair and add to the sanctuary of Yemen, and he founded the famous College of Priests of Yemen, whose councils guided both for good and for evil the dynasties of Egypt for several hundreds of years. He richly endowed these priests and their entity, and his temple, and on many of the coffins of this brotherhood are representations of members of the order in the act of worshipping his names and pouring out libations before his cartouches. The priest of Yemen had, no doubt, good reason for worshipping Yemen Hatep with such devotion. And see Maspero's Recueil de Travaux, Tome 17, page 67. And the second note is according to M. Begrain, the Third Dynasty, Recueil, Tome 17, page 67. Okay. Forgive my mispronunciation of the French here. But a real God, or at least what one hoped would be the real God, would obviously have different qualities and be known in different ways. And people will have favorites. One of my favorites, obviously, is what you see up there in the what this place is named after. It is unnecessary to describe in detail the growth of the cult of Yemen under the 18th dynasty, and it will suffice to say that the history of his cult is practically the history of Egypt for nearly 1,000 years. His priests made him possessor of the principal attributes and titles of all the ancient entities of Egypt, and their absolute power enabled them to modify, well, limited obviously, the old systems of belief of the country, or at least to write it like they have complete control. 100% people having the same faith, doesn't really happen much. They introduce the primitive entities of the land in their own system of theology, but assign to them subordinate positions and powers inferior to those of Yumin, or Yumin-Ra, as he was called, and the new editions of most of the old religious works which appeared at Thebes bore the traces of having been edited in accordance with their views and opinions. And many of its aspects, the cult of Yumin was less material than that of many of the old entities, and the religion of the priests themselves ruthlessly rejected many of the primitive beliefs which survived among the populace in general. And because of the religious freedom granted by the early Islamic State, the first 40 years or something like that, traditions didn't disappear, and people even were caught sneaking amulets and statues and stuff into the house of worship, because, well, I gotta take this thing with me when I pray, and because I'm praying to this thing too. And they're told, hey, this is just not the place for it. And we find to this day among the Arabs of the Arabian Peninsula that some shrines were maintained out in the desert, like, oh, this secret. So it's never 100%. There's a relative or a virtual conversion or something like that. And it's even less of a percent of the population when we're talking about when there's actually some sort of persecution or something going on. They were obliged to tolerate and respect the universal belief in Osiris as judge, king, and god of the dead, for they, of course, found it impossible to eliminate from the minds of the people the effects which the traditions of material heaven handed down for untold generations had made upon them. And no, connecting the material and the spiritual worlds is definitely essential of any religion. But when you try to force it, with something like what happened with Catholicism, what happened with Tibetan Buddhism, and, it's unsure in places what came with the cult coming in, what was there, and what got molded. Even the experts don't really know. Among the servants of Yumin and his temple, however, there were some who preferred to put their faith in the religious writings which had satisfied their ancestors for many generations before, and to these we owe the great collection of religious funeral texts called the Pur-Mhru, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, which is now commonly known as the Theban recension of the Book of the Dead. And remember, Hru, as in Horus, means the face of. So we have the book of the appearances and what's being made known. It is true that the subject matter of many of the texts is older than the 4th dynasty, and the phraseology of some of the dates of the period of the 5th and 6th dynasties, and the forms in which most of them are cast, are not more recent than the 11th or 12th dynasty, but it is equally true that the editing and arrangement of them by the Tibetan priest, and nothing of the additions of the supplementary hymns, chapters, and colored illustrations produce a very decided change in the general teachings of the collection. The Book of Coming Forth by Day, in its Theban form, was illustrated guide in the kingdom of Osiris, but the teachings did not satisfy the strict followers of Yumin-Ra, and they brought into use a recension of a work in which they were able to promulgate the particular ideas of their order as to the future state of the dead. The followers of Osiris, Yasir, believed that the righteous dead would find their everlasting abode in the kingdom of that entity, and would enjoy a fertile land with running streams, a life very like that which the well-to-do Egyptians lived upon earth. And just like in India and Europe, the sent ones, or people who are great sages, Osiris, as we know, could have been an actual human being at some point, and over the generations got divinized. The followers of Osiris believed that the righteous dead would find their everlasting abode in the kingdom of that entity and would enjoy a life in a fertile land with running streams, a life very like that which the well-to-do Egyptians lived upon earth. The followers of Yumin-Ra aimed at securing a place in the boat of the sun entity i.e., the boat of millions of years, so that they may sail over the sky with him each day, and enjoy the sight of the earth on which they had lived, and might, under his so-called all-powerful protection, pass through the regions of darkness by night, and emerge in heaven, being reborn each day. You know, if you make your sleep a spiritual process, you do your evening and your dusk rituals, you say a little something, you wash up, and you make going to sleep a ritual, then you wake up, you're reborn every time. And particularly, I'm reborn, I gotta do some ritual at dawn, and do I need more sleep? I'll do it again. In the kingdom of Osiris, the beatified dead ate bread cakes made from one wonderful kind of grain, and drank beer made from another kind, and enjoyed conjugal intercourse in the company of their relations and friends. All the material comforts were supplied by use of words of power, by which they even obtained entrance into that kingdom. Entrance into the boat of millions of years was likewise obtained by knowledge of magical words and formulae, and of the secret names of the great entities. But the food on which lived the beatified souls who succeeded in securing a place in the boat consisted of the emanations of the entity Ra, or, according to the priest of Yemen Ra. In other words, the beatified souls in the boat became beings formed of the light of Ra, on which they subsisted. The belief that the souls of the righteous flew into the boat of Ra is a very old one, but the doctrine in the form which it was developed by the priest of Yemen can never have been universally accepted in Egypt, for it was not sufficiently material to satisfy any but the educated classes, the great kings of the 18th and 19th dynasties, being convinced that their military successes were due to the influence and operations of Yemen Ra, dutifully accepted the instructions of the priest of the entity in all matters relating to his worship, and they permitted them to prepare tombs for them in the valley of Biban al-Muluk at Thebes, which were built and ornamented according to the views held by the followers of Yemen Ra according to the otherworld. The oldest tombs here, i.e. those of the 18th dynasty, are usually entered by means of long sloping corridors that lead down into the chambers which held the sarcophagi, and into smaller halls which adjoin the large chambers and latter tombs, and the corridors are often very long, and it is this characteristic which caused certain Greek characters to call them suriges, shepherd's pies. Suriges. Of the 45 tombs in this valley, Strabo mentions 40 only. How many is it? 42 is the implied number in the first Enochian key, one of the versions that was received. Not tombs, but chambers, but same thing, right? Same thing being represented. The oldest royal tomb appears to be that of Thutmose I, and the most recent that of Ramses XII of the 20th dynasty. These tombs vary greatly in details, so that they do in size and the arrangement and numbers of their chambers, but it seems that each tomb was intended to represent the underworld